Teach me to pray.
Teach me. Oh, Lord, you teach me to pray.
Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our
I pray. Well, I try to pray.
All right, all right. Well, hey, once again, it is great to have you here tonight. And in just a moment, we'll kind of get into our message, but I just want to highlight a couple significant things, one of which being we get going on tonight right after the message, and that is our 2018 Radiant Church Pie Bake Off. And of course, yeah, on the line, the NFL's got the Vince Lombardi Trophy, there's the World Series Trophy, there's the pin. Hey, those pale in comparison to what's on the line tonight, which is the 2018 RC Pie Champ, Crystal, I don't think it's Crystal pie plates, and a Starbucks card as well. So with actual money on it too. I didn't just get you one that was empty. So we invite you to stick around after service and dig into some pie. And if you didn't bring a pie, that's all right. We especially want to invite you to stick around because you will help provide some unbiased judging, so we can make sure that we get a true winner tonight. So invite you to stick around for that. Also, a couple things we got coming up on the calendar. December 1st, we're going to be meeting here at 10 a.m. to start decorating for Christmas. Hard to believe, but yeah, Christmas is right around the corner. Anyone already got their Christmas lights up? Wow, nice, yeah. Yeah, how about your Christmas tree? Yeah, hey, I'm in the same boat. So I already got it up, and I got the Christmas music going on. Maybe it's, I think it's been the nonstop like Christmas Hallmark movie marathon that Holly has on that has kind of led to that. So anyway, you're invited to be a part of that. And then also December 2nd, we've got our ladies' Christmas tea at Retha's, and that's at 2 o'clock. And you can find some more information out the info table there. I encourage you to sign up for that. And so just a great connection event for you ladies as well. So I don't think us guys are invited to that, but I don't know. Are we not? I was hoping for like a sympathy invite out of that. It's like, no, you're not. So, but all right. Well, hey, let's go and pray and let's dive into the message tonight. Father God, we did thank you so much just for this opportunity to be here and just to be able to worship you, God. And I pray that this message tonight that would challenge us, but it would also encourage us, God, that we would just be reminded of your incredible heart and your incredible love and your incredible purpose for each and every one of us here in this place. And God, you've got good things in store for us, and we're believing that. We're holding on to that. And God, we're trusting in just your goodness and your grace in our lives. Lord, you're so good to us. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Well, hey, we are in a series entitled Dangerous Prayers, where over the past several weeks, we've been talking about those prayers that when you pray them, have a way of putting to risk the comfort in our lives, sometimes the convenience of our lives, the mundane, the status quo of our lives. Sort of those prayers that they, even as you utter the words, they kind of get the heartbeat kind of racing a little bit faster, right? And so we've been talking about these prayers of help me. That was the first week. And then show me. And tonight, we're talking about this prayer, search me. Search me. And it's a prayer that we find, it's a prayer of David we find in Psalm chapter 139, verses 23 through 24. And we're going to kind of use this as a launching pad into our topic tonight. And it kicks off this. It says, search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting. Talk about a dangerous prayer. And listen, you got to understand to kind of put this prayer into perspective. This is not a prayer of pride. This is not like David, like, man, I'm all that in a bag of chips. Like, God, just try to find some fault in me. This is not what David's getting at. No, it's actually a prayer of humility. What David's getting at, he said, like, God, listen, I want my heart to grow for you. I want my relationship, my heart, my love for you. I want that to be expanded. I want that to be grown. I want to grow closer to you, God. And so search me. Reveal to me anything that would hinder that. Test my heart. Reveal anything that would slow that down or be an obstacle in that process. And again, this is why I say this is such a dangerous prayer, because here's the thing is that when we have the courage to pray that prayer like David prayed, search me, oh God, grow my heart for you, God. Grow this relationship I have with you. Listen, here's what makes it dangerous, is because God most often answers this prayer with the test of generosity. With the test of generosity. And when you think about it, it kind of makes some sense, right? Because why wouldn't you not start with the thing that is oftentimes most connected to our heart, which is our treasure, which is our stuff, which is our things. In fact, the Bible actually talks about this multiple places. In Matthew 6:21 says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." I like 1 Chronicles 29:17 says, "I know also, my God, that you test the heart and have pleasure in uprightness. As for me and the uprightness of my heart, I've willingly offered all these things." Now to really understand the power in that passage right there, you got to understand that this is actually words spoken by David at the end of his life. And it's towards the end of his life where he's so thankful for all the things that God has done in his life, the ways God has blessed him. He has this desire to build a place of worship for the people of Israel, to build the temple of God. And yet what's interesting is God's response to him is that, no, David, I'm going to save that for your son Solomon. Your son Solomon will actually build my temple. And yet I love David's response to God's response in this, is that for David, it's like, well, you know what? If I can't build your temple, then at the very least I can fund it. And he goes on to make what scholars say is the biggest, most enormous, act of financial generosity you see in the Bible. He writes a check in today's currency that would equate to $22 billion. And it sets it aside to build this temple of God. And listen, I share that because the point being is I don't think it was by accident that the man who would be known for his heart for God would also be known as one of the most generous people in Scripture as well. And so again, I bring this up because, again, generosity tests my heart. At the end of the day, generosity tests my heart. And this is important for us to get, because if we're going to grow our heart, aka through this test of generosity, something you got to understand about generosity is the reason I call it a test of generosity is because generosity is not something you're born with. Like, you're not born a generous person. In fact, the only people that would disagree with that are people who've never had kids. Because if you have kids, you know that we come out of the womb, it's all about me, my stuff, my issues, my things. We're not born generous. Generosity is something you've got to learn. In fact, we even see this even in Genesis. We see this, here God is created, created our earth and created, this amazing garden and created Adam and Eve, and they're in the garden. They've got, fruit plates galore, as far as the eye can see. It's this perfect setting. I mean, they've got everything they could ever possibly want. I mean, here's Adam looking at his hot wife who's running around with no clothes, and then there's Eve who's looking at her husband, looking at her life. This is before kids, so she's not having to worry about laundry or cleaning up a house or anything like that. There's no pressure. I mean, it's a perfect setup. And yet, even in this perfect world, this world where they had everything they could ever want, even here in this place where God said, listen, hey, 99.9% of the stuff you can enjoy, and you just, live and enjoy my blessing. But this one thing, this one fruit, I don't want you to take of. What did we do as humankind? What was our natural tendency was, again, that we're born with that desire. It's like more is sort of never enough. Like, okay, I keep getting more. I got to get more stuff. I got to get more things. And so even in this perfect setting, this perfect environment, even there, where we see this tendency a sort of lack of satisfaction, this tendency to constantly be pursuing more because, again, generosity is not something you're born with. It's something you and I have to learn. It's something that has to be developed in our lives. And the way it's developed in our lives is, again, through this test of generosity. This test of generosity. It's a test that actually is made up of really three parts that we're going to focus on tonight. And the first part being the measure of generosity. If we're going to grow in generosity and ultimately grow our heart towards God, we've got to understand the measure of generosity, how God measures generosity in the kingdom economy. And to see this, we're going to see this by looking at a story in Mark chapter 12, verse 41. It says, Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury, while many rich people came by and threw in large amounts. Now, this is part of the reason right here. This story is why I've shared with you guys multiple times that I think a lot of us would really struggle to have Jesus as the pastor of our church. Like, you'd really struggle to have Jesus as your pastor. It'd be because of stories like this. I mean, think about how awkward this is. I mean, here they are. They're going to the temple. It's offering time. And here's Jesus, like, pulling up his little camping chair. And he's, like, just parking himself right in front of the offering. Which, by the way, might explain why there were so many large gifts that day. It's because, I mean, that's a little bit of pressure. I mean, you're putting in the offering, and there's Jesus just kind of like sitting there just watching you. Like, yeah, was it a 20? A 30? What are you putting in there, right? And you just see just sort of this awkwardness. But what's interesting is that Jesus was watching this, not just to create this awkward scene, awkward setting. He was watching it to ultimately teach his disciples, and you and I also, a lesson in this. And see, you got to understand, Jesus wasn't the only one watching everyone giving that day. In fact, back then, the offering time was really, it was a pretty big show. When people came in, actually the offering kind of bowl was what it really was. It was this big copper bowl in the temple. And the reason they made it that way is that when you drop your coins and drop your money in, the more money you dropped in, the more coins you dropped in, the louder sound it made. And so it would really draw a lot of attention. So these guys are not just dropping in these big gifts, but they're making a show out of it. I mean, they're making it rain. They're dropping it. It's like, yeah, you know what I just put in there. Like, I mean, it's a big show. And so they're doing this, and then I don't know what happens. Maybe somewhere in the lines of this passage, maybe they all decide to take a little break and go out and get coffee. But they're all kind of hanging around, and this widow kind of comes up, and while everyone else is sort of doing their own thing, this widow comes up and she drops in 2 little coins. Barely makes any noise whatsoever. And while all the other guys are, kind of talking about, man, isn't it amazing? These huge gifts. I mean, boy, they're like making it rain in the temple today. And yet here's Jesus like, whoa. Did you guys just see that? Did you guys just hear that? Like this widow right here, like did you just see the enormity of the gift she just gave? The generosity that she just showed. In fact, we see this in Mark 12:43. It says, calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. And here's why this matters and why it relates to us is what we're going to come to discover is it wasn't the size of the gift, but it was the heart behind it that mattered most to Jesus. That's what he was really trying to get across to the disciples that day. He was trying to get across to us. And in fact, he goes on in Mark 12, verse 44. He says, they all gave out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty put in everything. All she had to live on. What he's saying is, listen, I don't measure generosity the way you measure generosity. I have a different ruler. I have a different scale. And can I tell you, Jesus' measure of generosity, might I add, is actually way more challenging. It's actually, I think, for many of us, a lot harder. Because, see, what you got to understand is Jesus does not measure generosity by how much you give, but in how much you keep. He doesn't measure generosity by how much you give, but in relation to how much you keep. And this is where the tension comes for a lot of us. This is for a lot of us the reason we struggle to really give. Because we sit there and think, well, what does it matter? I have hardly anything to give. What's my few coins even going to matter. And we mistake a quantity with worth. We mistake quantity with value. But what Jesus looks at is not, for him, it's not about quantity, but it's about cost. It's about sacrifice. It's what we give into relation to what we keep. And again, this is where it can get really confusing for a lot of us, and sometimes be the struggle for a lot of us. Because again, we oftentimes think that God, when it comes to this topic of generosity, and when we hear it in church and we talk about giving, and the natural inclination is to think that God's somehow out for more of my money. Like God's somehow in heaven, and he's like got a cigarette in hand, and he's like totally stressed now about, man, I don't know if we're going to have enough to keep, pay the bills, to keep the lights on up here. Man, I really hope they come through on the offering time at church. That's not the reality. See, this has nothing to do with God's concern of trying to get more of your money, but it has everything to do with a God who's interested and concerned with getting more of your heart. More of your heart. And that's why I say that it's important that we understand that God's measurement of generosity is very different than ours. It's not about quantity, but it's about cost. In fact, I was thinking about this and show you something that when you see it, it's probably not going to wow you very much. But you got to understand, there was a time when this would have drawn a crowd. And it's this right here. A pineapple, right? Now to you and I, it's like, pineapple, I got this for like $1 at Ray's, and I mean, just, it's, dime a dozen, right? Well, you got to understand, when they were first discovered, Columbus kind of drew notice to them, and when he sailed the ocean blue, 1492, and, comes to the New World, and when he arrives in the New World, from South America, they brought these things called pineapples up. And it was the first time that first time Europeans had ever even seen such a fruit, seen such a thing. And so they brought it back. They took it back to London, and of course, it got to London, and when it got there, like, it was a huge hit. It was a huge craze. Like, all the royalty, like, they were enamored by this stuff. All the Spanish kings, all the English kings and queens. I mean, they were taken back. And in fact, would you know, this amazes me, but the cost, if you were to put the cost of a single pineapple back in the 1400s in today's economy, one pineapple would have cost you $8,000. Because they were seen to be so rare. It's such an anomaly. In fact, for hundreds of years actually after that, these were such a desired object. Such a desired treasure. Like, there was actually businesses that were made and created where you could rent a pineapple. Like, you could actually rent a pineapple. I don't know what you would do with like forget Netflix, guys. Hey, come over, let's stare at a pineapple, all right? And of course, you couldn't eat it because then you'd buy it, right? So I don't really know what you would do with that. But again, it was huge. It was, it's costing a fortune. It was a treasure. And I can tell some of you are like, yeah, I don't know about that. In fact, actually, interesting enough, it actually influenced, it was such a big deal. It influenced a lot of the architecture in London. In fact, I think we got a picture of a pineapple. This is St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And you'll see these pineapples actually, throughout the architecture of London. Now, the interesting thing is, again, they were super valuable. That was until, a few hundred years later, some very industrial-minded folk realized, hey, I can make a quick buck off of these pineapples. And so they created these plantations in Hawaii to start growing pineapples. And they grew them by the thousands and started to flood the market with these pineapples to the point now where, again, we can get a pineapple for $1 or, get it in a little Dole can. It's all chopped up and ready to go. It's seemingly worthless now. And look, I share that because, again, just to illustrate the fact that, again, quantity does not always equate to worth or value. Quantity in and of itself. And so often when it comes to generosity, we think, the bigger the gift is, like somehow God's more impressed by that. And yet the reality is, when you go back to this story, it's not to say that God was somehow demeaning the large gifts or not, not acknowledging those, but he was also celebrating very much this lady's small gift because it was in relation not to what she gave, but what she kept. It was an act of a complete and total sacrifice. It cost her so much. The measure of generosity for God, it's not about quantity, but it's about the cost. It's about the sacrifice in relation to what we keep. So we see the measure of generosity, but that leads us to the second part of this test, which is the motive of generosity. The motive of generosity. And this shows up actually a couple chapters later in Mark chapter 14. And this is a story where we catch up to it. It's, Jesus is revisiting a town in Bethany where he actually, just in John, like chapter, in John 11, he actually performed one of his most amazing miracles, which we'll get to in just a moment. But he's returning to this town that he'd just been to, Simon the leper's house, and this is where we catch up to it in verse 3. It says, while he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. As some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor," and they rebuked her harshly. Now, as the story goes on, Jesus would stand up for her and